Now we have to turn to the less pleasant business of Northwestern, a story we've been covering since it broke. And Pat Fitzgerald, the former football coach, was first suspended for 2 weeks and then fired. And then the baseball coach was fired. And now,
Everyone's coming forward. Someone on cheerleading, someone on girls volleyball, girls softball.
yeah,
But I said yesterday they should just eliminate all sports at Northwestern.
that's easy.
Get her done.
I agree. This is what a friend of mine who's a former sports writer said, which I quoted early on. That's fine. You want to do that? Just you want to be University of Chicago? Just go D3. Make it easy. But the larger issues that this implicates certainly are not limited to Northwestern. When you have claims of psychological abuse that are attendant to these civil complaints that are being filed, players coming forward from a couple years ago,
Up until 2008.
more than that now, more than that. Outkick actually.com reporting on a piece that was in Athletic. The Athletic piece claimed naked pull-ups were ingrained as a Kenosha changing room tradition as early as 2001. Not everyone had an issue with getting naked with their teammates to work out because it wasn't mandatory. One former player, Rico Lamiti, it was weirdo fat guys on the team doing weirdo fat guy stuff. Okay. Naked pull-ups weren't the only time players would allegedly lose all their clothing and start hazing each other, according to this reporting. Offensive linemen would allegedly lather themselves with soap, line up at the entrance to the showers, then force underclassmen to squeeze past them to get into the shower. This has already been reported, actually. This was called the annual car wash, at least according to previous reporting. The Rico Lamed, who didn't have a problem with the pull-up, said he did have a problem with having to squeeze by offensive linemen. It was absolutely disgusting. Touching anybody, that was a hard red line that never should have been crossed. But another player told Athletic the hazing in the showers wasn't too bad, and the linemen would move aside if there was an issue. So there's some dispute here, as there is generally.
And then there's a new verb. People are saying Lloyd Yates was on with some radio show, sports show, saying that people would get Kenosha because they have.
Well, that's the naked pull-ups and stuff.
Right, but they would happen in Kenosha when they were on their summer training. Like how the Bears would go to Platteville.
Well, that's what he's just saying.
Right, I know.
The naked pull-ups in the Kenosha changing room, that's what tradition, allegedly.
Right, but it was so well known, he said, that it had its own meaning. But I don't know. I mean, this guy, Lloyd Yates, he came from Oak Park River Forest, started out as a backup quarterback, went to, I think, wide receiver, played in only 2 games, didn't even last 4 years, and was quiet all these years.
We were thrown into a culture where physical, emotional, and sexual abuse was normalized. We wanted to fit in. We wanted to earn trust and respect. And if you went against that, you were an outcast. You were labeled, and it warranted further abuse.
And he's being represented by Ben Crump.
Yeah.
Along with 14 others so far, but they say it's going to grow.
Attorneys Pat Salvi and Parker Steiner both filed lawsuits. Who filed both lawsuits that have been filed. I guess Crump's lawsuit has not been filed. Will be shortly if it hasn't already. Said they've heard from Northwestern athletes in several sports, including volleyball. Both sets of attorneys described a pervasive culture of alleged physical and psychological abuse at Northwestern, but they didn't identify specific individuals who led or knowingly condoned hazing, according to ESPN's report on the matter. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by the aforementioned attorney, Pat Salvi, founder of the law firm Salvi, Schostok, and Pritchard. Pat Salvi, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me on.
So the players that you represent are only those that are John Does at this point. Is that accurate?
In terms of the lawsuits that have been filed, that's right.
Okay. And their specific allegations are what?
Well, currently we've filed on behalf of football players, and so their experiences are similar to those that have been reported. As we've investigated ourselves, talked to people that have reached out, people that used to work within the athletic department, people from across various sports, some of whom have retained us. What we've learned is that over the years, there have been many instances where, not just in the football program is really just one piece of this, and the watershed moment is as a result of the football program. But what we're learning is that this was pervasive within the athletic department.
What was?
That people. Go ahead.
What was pervasive specifically?
Sure. That within the athletic department, when somebody would come to the coach or an assistant coach, or go to people within the athletic department, or people within compliance or other areas within the Northwestern institution, even as high up as the athletic directors, that their complaints would not be heard, that they would not be acted upon, that there would be no repercussions, no consequences. And so really what we've learned is we've talked to a lot of people that have come forward, is that this was a cultural thing. And really some of the most damning allegations come from a story that did get some publicity back in 2021, and it's being talked about again now, where a cheerleader came forward, filed a lawsuit, and alleged that she and other cheerleaders would be made to go to various events where there would be very wealthy and intoxicated alumni that would be incredibly inappropriate, groping them, sexually harassing them, and they were just expected to take it. And it's that kind of attitude that permeated the rest of the athletic department. And when there's a void in leadership, these types of things are allowed to grow. And I think it reached a breaking point. And one of the comments before I came on is, well, why would Mr. Yates wait so long to come forward? Well, sometimes you need that support. Sometimes you need that strength in numbers to come forward. It's very hard. Part of the reason why these people endured what they endured, even after going to their coaches or to other people in the athletic department to try to complain and advocate for change, they'd get shot down. And what were their options? To transfer away from Northwestern so that they can then have their on their resume that they were at Northwestern for a couple of years and then had to go somewhere else? How's that going to look? Or do you want to stay and be a varsity athlete and graduate from Northwestern? Just put up with it. And that was the choice that these 18, 19, 20-year-olds had to make, despite the fact that they were recruited with the promise of being kept safe, getting a great education, and being able to play a varsity sport Division I in a Power 5 conference. They were let down.
Well, does the client that you're representing, does he think Pat Fitzgerald knew about this? Did he see this activity? And also Jim Phillips, the athletic director.
So from the evidence that I've heard, it's hard to believe that Pat Fitzgerald can make the claim that he didn't know about it.
Yeah, but was he in the locker room?
Football.
I mean, when you said that you see evidence, what evidence do you have?
Sure.
Because that's what Pat Fitzgerald's attorney is, saying, well, where's the evidence? Sure.
So if we're talking about did Pat Fitzgerald ever come in for the car wash that you guys just described, I can't speak to that one way or the other. Maybe he didn't, maybe he did. What I can say is that it wasn't just in the locker room. And we're not just talking about yelling at a player for screwing up a play. We're talking about things that have nothing to do with on-the-field play that would lead to serious humiliation on the field, dressing people down in such a way that were physically, personally abusive in a way that is intrusive. And so I am walking a fine line because I can't get ahead of my clients. I can't say everything as this is unfolding, and I'm going to be filing more lawsuits on behalf of more people in the coming days. But what I can say is that the idea that a football coach who's been there since 2006, who was an assistant there since before that and played there under Gary Barnett, who was fired at the University of Colorado under a horrible cloud of sexual assault by his players, and was fired in a situation where he made just incredibly insensitive comments about a female kicker that was on the team who alleged that she had been raped, that the toxicity of what's taken place within the football program and allowed by the greater athletic department is very apparent to me. And when you think about everything that a football coach knows about its team, the micromanaging that football coaches do, they know how many calories are going into their players' bodies. They know every little bit of the workouts that they're doing on a daily basis. They schedule down to the minute. To suggest that Coach Fitzgerald didn't have knowledge of this, let's let the evidence come out and see how that statement looks in a year or two after I get the opportunity to take his deposition, conduct discovery, and have witnesses come forward.
Isn't that what Maggie Hickey concluded, though? Maggie Hickey, the former Inspector General of Illinois, who did the independent legal review retained by the university, isn't that what she found, that she didn't have evidence that Fitzgerald had knowledge?
So the Northwestern Office of General Counsel hand-selected that person, that firm, to conduct the investigation.
But what did she find?
Still don't know. Hold on. We still don't know anything about the details of that investigation because they haven't been released. Only an executive summary that ultimately led to his termination. So we know that. And we also know that at a minimum, Northwestern, through its own internal investigation, found him to have been what I would call grossly negligent if he didn't know this. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to know, Maggie Hickey, who did she talk to? And from what time periods and what was asked, the details of that investigation, I'm very curious to learn them. And so we're gonna conduct a full-blown investigation through the discovery process on behalf of the victims, not an investigation paid for by the Office of Legal Counsel at Northwestern, which over now more than a decade has been complicit in the athletic department's failures across the board.
Mm-hmm. Alleged victims, that is. And speaking of those alleged...
hold on. Let's talk... Well, hold on. Alleged victims.
No, not alleged. No, not hold on.
Is this a conspiracy? Is that the suggestion?
Have you proven? You filed a complaint. Have you proven something in a court of law? No, you haven't. So they're alleged.
Okay.
Isn't that is that the definition of alleged, counselor, or am I wrong?
We will.
We will. You haven't.
Well,
we will.
I think
you haven't.
I think the suggestion is that these people are lying about what
the suggestion is that they're making allegations. That's what alleged means.
Okay.
So speaking of those alleged victims, and conflicts of interest, which you're implying about the hand-selected Maggie Hickey to do this review, what about incentives that former players have to come forward now, especially to pile on? So, for example, is it fair to ask questions about, for example, a Ramon Diaz, who last played for Northwestern in 2008, is making allegations publicly along the lines of what your clients, if he isn't one of them, your other clients are making, and what has been reported. And yet, in 2010, he gave an interview to the local newspapers, so this is 2 years after he graduated, about what happened as he went from Morris High School to Northwestern, and he talks about his struggles and his coming to God through a player at Northwestern introducing him to the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And he talks a lot about his struggles, very, candid interviews, fine. He talks about Northwestern football, time the Northwestern football team. He doesn't bring up anything he's bringing up now. That's in 2010. In 2020, 3 years ago, he tweeted this: Coach Fitz continues to influence my life today. He expects his athletes to be exceptional students. The culture he creates at Northwestern is one that I speak of with great admiration to young athletes daily. I'm proud to be a Wildcat. Go Cats. 3 years later, he is talking about the trauma he suffered and he did so at the hands of this toxic culture that other people are saying. So with somebody like him as one of the first athletes out under his own name saying these things, does that prompt any legitimate questions about the credibility of some of the charges that are being leveled?
I think that everything that you just described can live in the same place. And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand about abuse and humiliation, is the manner in which it affects people. And the way it affects people, not only when they're 18, 19, 20 years old, but how they go forward and deal with it. And so someone like Ramon Diaz, who over time has struggled significantly with the experiences that he had at Northwestern, he was an offensive lineman. He was in an offensive lineman room where, from various details that I've been provided, not just hazing and other aspects that were humiliating in terms of the rituals, but also significant racial discrimination. And so for that type of behavior to be allowed, it's just not acceptable. And so everything that you just said, I think that can all live in the same place, and to articulate it like it has to be a dichotomy, that's not really acknowledging the complexity of a human being who's been through abusive practices and rituals that have had an impact on them going forward.
Well, I didn't.
What a racial abuse.
Wait. He's already detailed.
Everybody can be scrutinized.
Yes, I didn't say it was a dichotomy. I said does it raise questions about his credibility?
I think that everybody will be scrutinized. We welcome that. I think Northwestern likely is not looking forward to being scrutinized, because they know so much that we don't yet know, and we're trying to find out. Does it take away from his credibility? I don't think you can say that in 30 seconds and say, well, he tweeted this and he said this at one point, but then he came forward and said this now. It's going to require a much deeper dive. And that's what the litigation process is going to bring out, in particular, discovery from Northwestern, which is what we're looking forward to getting at.
I understand the eggshell theory of civil law. You take the defendant as they are, but do you have any concerns about this sort of catch-all psychological abuse, as clearly by the fact that hundreds of players have gone through Pat Fitzgerald's football programs and football, over the 17 years he was at Northwestern? Most of them are not saying anything of the sort. A lot of them have come forward to defend Pat Fitzgerald, guys that played for him, concurrent with some of the players that are alleging something different, this toxic culture, this hazing culture. And so, the psychological abuse standard, what is it? It's just intentional infliction of emotional distress based on the particular perspective of the plaintiff. And so you have no concerns about some players viewing something as this is what happens with testosterone-addled D1 football players in the locker room versus people who say that, I should be able to exist on a football team in this way, regardless of what the other players suggest is copacetic.
Well, I certainly expect that to be the defense, and I would understand that to also be how this culture within the football program and the athletics department generally got out of control, because that's exactly the mentality that ultimately leads to many of these student athletes suffering from this abuse. But to your point, there are certainly varying degrees, just speaking scientifically and medically, as to how this might affect somebody. It could be temporary. It could be more permanent. It could be symptoms that would fall under the diagnosis of PTSD, or it might not. Anxiety disorder, addiction disorder, or perhaps it didn't affect someone to that level where they sought to escape through drugs and alcohol, for example. So there's no doubt that each plaintiff is his or her own person with his or her own damages, if any. So again, in a case like this, it's not a class action. Everybody's going to have their own individual case, and their own individual damages will be assessed. There are neuropsychologists, there are neurologists, there are psychologists, psychiatrists that are able to make these diagnoses. They're well trained. And so while it's a little different than a broken arm or a broken leg, that's for sure. But the way that our outside world affects our brain can cause injury nonetheless.
Do you expect,
even if you can't see it?
do you expect that you'll be filing suits against, on behalf of players for female sports teams at Northwestern too?
Yes, I do.
Volleyball, softball, or some other sport that we're not aware of yet?
I would expect both of those sports. We've also heard
Field hockey, lacrosse.
Yep. We've also heard stories from the field hockey and lacrosse teams, the men's soccer team, and so.
So basically, every women's sport that's being offered at Northwestern.
Well,
soccer, field hockey,
a lot of
lacrosse,
sports.
volleyball,
Yeah, a lot of sports.
cheerleading.
A lot of sports.
Yeah.
All
Can you
right.
give us any details about that? Was there any, roughhousing in the locker room, anything like that, or is this more of a bullying nature type of complaint?
I would call it extreme hazing, abuse, and at times it would rise to the level of sexual abuse and sexual violence that would then go reported, and there would be no actions, no consequence. And that might be similar to what the cheerleader story was, the plaintiff that filed the lawsuit back in 2021 that I described earlier, as well as other instances when perhaps across sports there was harassment or sexual assault that ultimately was not dealt with appropriately.
And so the argument is, in all these cases, will include Jim Phillips when he was AD or Derek Gregg when he's been AD. They knew or they should have known. The coaches knew or they should have known, similar to the Fitzgerald argument.
That's right, and I would for at least certain instances, we can drop the should have known. No, knew.
Okay.
Directly knew. Yes.
Patrick Salvi is the founder of the law firm Salvi, Schostok, and Pritchard, and he's one of the attorneys representing a number of players at Northwestern, athletes at Northwestern, former, maybe present too, don't know. But we're going to find out as this proceeds. Patrick Salvi, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, story's far from over, and he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line. All right, coming up on Chicago's Morning Answer, the time has arrived.
Yeah, perfect segue if you want to talk more about the future of Northwestern athletics or Northwestern University generally, and how these cases could set a precedent for other universities, other K-12 school systems, this nebulous standard of hazing that we were discussing with Pat Salvi. 312-642-5600, turnkey.pro answer line. Grab a line. We'll take your calls with comments, compliments, criticisms, general crack pottery. It's all at 8:38.
But now let's jump into the newsroom. Nikki Whaley in for Mike Scott.
Good morning. It's 70 degrees in Chicago. In the AM 560 The Answer newsroom, I'm Nikki Whaley. The U.S. says Russia is laying